At my father's retirement party, he raised a glass and said, "It's all thanks to my sons. My daughter never had what it takes." Everyone laughed at me, until I handed him a letter that made his face go pale. That same evening, his perfect legacy began to crumble. I'll never forget the sound of laughter that echoed through the banquet hall that evening. It wasn't just polite chuckles, it was the kind of cruel, effortless laughter that carries weight. The kind that stays with you. And it was all directed at me. The occasion was my father's retirement party. After nearly 40 years at the same company, he was being honored with speeches, gifts, and a slideshow of smiling faces. My brothers sat at the head table, practically glowing under the praise. I sat a little further down, in a navy dress I'd chosen carefully, hoping he might, just once, notice me. And then it happened. My father, flushed with pride, raised his glass and said, "It's all thanks to my sons. My daughter never had what it takes." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. His words cut deeper than any insult I'd ever endured, not because they were unexpected, but because he chose to humiliate me in front of a room filled with colleagues, neighbors, and relatives. And worse, everyone laughed. Even my brothers, who glanced at me with that familiar smirk, "You'll never measure up." I felt my face burn. The clinking of glasses, the applause, the laughter, it all blurred together as I stood up. I hadn't planned on saying anything. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. I walked over to him, handed him a sealed envelope, and said quietly, "For my beloved father." Then I left. I didn't wait for his reaction, but I knew he would open it soon. And when he did, he would discover the truth that I had kept hidden for years, the truth that would shake him to his core. Later that night, word reached me. When he read the letter, his hands began to tremble, his face went pale, and he had to excuse himself. By the time the evening ended, people whispered that he looked unwell. That same evening, something irreversible began. When I got home that night, the house felt colder than usual. I slipped off my heels, dropped my clutch on the counter, and sat in silence, staring at the faint light from the street lamp bleeding through the blinds. I could still hear the echo of his words, "My daughter never had what it takes." It wasn't new. He had been saying versions of that my entire life. When I brought home straight A's in high school, he told me grades didn't matter if you couldn't make something of yourself. When I got accepted into college on scholarship, he said it was cute but wouldn't pay the bills. And when I opened my small graphic design studio, he shrugged and asked if I'd finally get a real job. But the letter in his hands now, that was different. It wasn't anger poured onto paper. It was truth. Pure, undeniable truth. Because for years, while my brothers basked in his approval, I had been quietly carrying a weight none of them even realized existed. I paid the mortgage when he fell behind after a reckless investment. I covered the medical bills when mom's insurance didn't stretch far enough. I even helped one of my brothers out of debt when his business idea failed. And I never said a word. Not once. The envelope I gave him contained every receipt, every bank statement, every record. A quiet reminder that while he dismissed me, I was the one holding the family together. Without me, the roof over his head would have been gone years ago. I imagined his face when he realized it. The shame. The sudden awareness that the daughter he mocked had been his lifeline all along. That night, my phone buzzed constantly, texts from relatives asking why I'd left early, why Dad looked so pale, why there was tension in the air after my little stunt. I didn't answer. I let them wonder. As I sat in the dark, I told myself one thing: this wasn't the end. This was only the first crack in the perfect image he'd built. And deep down, I knew, I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. A dozen missed calls. 2 from my mother, 3 from my oldest brother, and at least 7 from numbers I didn't recognize, probably Dad's friends or coworkers who had been at the party. I didn't answer. Instead, I brewed a pot of coffee and tried to steady my hands. I knew what they wanted: explanations, apologies, anything that would smooth over the ugly crack I had opened in the shiny porcelain mask of our family. By mid-afternoon, there was a sharp knock on my door. When I opened it, my brother Daniel stood there, still wearing the same smug expression he'd had at the banquet. He pushed his way inside without waiting for an invitation. "What the hell was that last night?" he demanded, his voice low but sharp. "You embarrassed him in front of everyone." I leaned against the counter, sipping my coffee. Did I? Or did he embarrass himself when he dismissed his own daughter in front of 100 people? Daniel rolled his eyes. "Come on, you know how he is. He didn't mean it like that. And whatever you put in that letter, it nearly gave him a heart attack." Good, I thought. Aloud, I said, maybe he should think twice before spitting on the one person who's been holding this family together. He froze, his smirk faltering. "What do you mean by that?" I smiled faintly. "Check your email. You'll find a copy of everything I gave Dad." Daniel left soon after, his confidence noticeably shaken. A part of me felt guilty for dragging my brothers into it, but another part of me, one that had been silenced for years, felt an odd, quiet satisfaction. For once, they would see me not as the weak link, but as the backbone they never acknowledged. By evening, my mother finally reached me. Her voice trembled on the phone. "Why did you do this, honey? You know how fragile your father's pride is." "Because I'm tired, Mom," I said softly. "Tired of being invisible. Tired of being treated like I don't matter." There was a long pause, then a whisper. "He hasn't come out of his study since last night. He hasn't eaten. He just keeps looking at those papers." Her words settled over me like heavy rain. I didn't want him to collapse, but part of me knew he needed this reckoning. He needed to see what his pride had cost. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the years I had sacrificed, working late, scrimping on my own life so that theirs could remain steady. And all the while, he praised my brothers for being men of the house. No more. The quiet revenge had begun, and I wasn't going to stop until the balance was finally restored. But what I didn't realize then, what none of us knew, was that the letter wasn't just going to change how my father saw me. It was going to tear open secrets that had been buried far deeper than money. Secrets that, once exposed, would set everything on fire. 2 days passed before I heard directly from my father. I was in my studio, sketching designs for a client, when my phone buzzed. His name lit up the screen, and for a moment, I froze. He never called me first. Ever. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice was strained, almost hoarse. "Come to the house." That was all he said. No greeting. No explanation. Just a command. When I arrived, the house felt different. The curtains were half drawn, dishes piled in the sink, and the air carried a heaviness I couldn't quite name. My father sat at the dining table, the letter and its stack of receipts spread out in front of him like evidence at a trial. He didn't look up when I entered. For a long time, the only sound was the ticking clock on the wall. Finally, he asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" I swallowed hard. "Because you never listened." His hand trembled slightly as he traced the edge of one receipt. "I thought, your brothers," his voice cracked, and he stopped, clearing his throat. "I didn't know it was you." Anger bubbled in me, sharp and hot. "Of course you didn't. You never cared enough to ask." He finally looked at me then, his eyes tired, older than I had ever seen them. But instead of apology, I saw something else, fear. It wasn't just shame for how he had treated me. It was as if he realized that my truth had power, and that power could unravel the story he had built his life upon. "Don't show this to anyone else," he said quickly. Almost desperately. I tilted my head. "Why not?" "Afraid they'll finally see who really held this family together?" His jaw tightened. "You wouldn't understand." That phrase, those 4 words, stabbed me deeper than the laughter at the banquet. You wouldn't understand. As if I hadn't lived every sacrifice, every late-night calculation, every choice between paying their bills and buying something for myself. Something in his tone told me this wasn't just about his pride. There was something hidden, something he didn't want me, or anyone, to uncover. I leaned forward, my voice steady. Maybe I understand more than you think. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to confess something. His mouth opened, then closed again. Instead, he gathered the papers into a neat pile, his movements slow, deliberate. "You've made your point," he said finally. "Now let it go." But I couldn't. I wouldn't. As I left the house that night, the autumn air felt sharp against my skin. I knew this wasn't over. His desperation told me there was more beneath the surface, and for the first time I wanted to dig. Because revenge wasn't just about proving myself anymore. It was about uncovering the truth he was so desperate to keep buried. And I had no idea just how dangerous that truth was going to be. That night, I barely slept. My father's face haunted me, the way his eyes darted from the receipts to me, the sharp edge of his voice when he begged me not to share them. He wasn't just embarrassed. He was scared. And fear doesn't come from pride alone. Fear comes from secrets. The next morning, I stopped by my mother's house. She greeted me with a forced smile, her hands busy kneading dough in the kitchen as though nothing were wrong. But I could see it in her eyes, she hadn't slept either. "Mom," I said, sitting at the counter, "what is he hiding?" Her hands stilled. For a moment, the only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. She didn't answer right away, and that silence told me everything. "I don't know what you mean," she said finally, but her voice trembled. "Don't lie to me," I whispered. "You know. That's why he's desperate. That's why he doesn't want anyone else to see the truth. It's not just about him ignoring me. There's something bigger." She shook her head, her eyes glistening. "Some things are better left buried." Her words were meant as caution, but to me, they were a challenge. I had spent my whole life being buried, my achievements, my sacrifices, my worth. I wasn't about to bury the truth, too. That afternoon, I drove back to the old office where Dad had worked for decades. The receptionist still remembered me and, after a little small talk, I asked casually if I could see some of the files related to his retirement benefits. I told her I was helping organize his paperwork since he was overwhelmed. She hesitated but eventually agreed to pull a few things. As she disappeared into the back, my pulse quickened. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, only that I would know it when I saw it. When she returned, she slid a thin folder across the counter. "This is what I could find," she said kindly. "Please bring it back when you're done." I thanked her and walked out with the folder tucked tightly under my arm. In my car, I opened it, my hands trembling. And there it was. Buried among the pension forms and HR notes was a record of financial discrepancies, withdrawals from company funds, signed under my father's name. Quiet, consistent, stretching back years. Nothing huge at once, but enough over time to add up to something serious. I sat there, staring at the numbers, my stomach twisting. My father hadn't just overlooked me. He had stolen, from the very company that had just honored him with a retirement celebration. No wonder he wanted me silent. If anyone connected my records of supporting the family with his financial mess, questions would start to swirl. The proud man everyone respected would be exposed as a fraud. And suddenly, his toast at the banquet took on a darker meaning. "It's all thanks to my sons." Of course he credited them, because if the truth came out, he needed them shielded, innocent, untarnished. But me? I was expendable. He thought he could bury me along with his sins. Not anymore. That night, as I drove home with the folder in the passenger seat, I realized something. This was no longer just about revenge. It was about justice. For myself. For the truth. For the years he had stolen, not just from the company, but from me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. I felt dangerous. I placed the folder on my kitchen table and stared at it as though it were a live grenade. The papers inside carried enough weight to shatter the image of my father that everyone held, the respected employee, the proud family man, the unshakable patriarch. I ran my fingers across the cover, thinking of the banquet again. All those people applauding him, celebrating his career, believing in his spotless reputation. And then there was me, the invisible daughter, dismissed with a cruel joke. But now, I had the truth. The question was, what would I do with it? I considered everything. Turning the documents over to the company. Sending them anonymously to the newspaper. Even slipping them into the hands of one of my brothers, just to see the look on their faces when they realized their hero had been lying for years. But part of me hesitated. Not out of fear, no, that had burned out of me long ago. It was something else. A voice deep inside that whispered, don't just destroy him. Make him understand. That evening, my mother called again. Her tone was softer this time, almost pleading. Your father isn't well. He hasn't left his study. He doesn't eat. Please, whatever you're doing, stop before it's too late. I wanted to tell her everything, to scream that it was too late already, that he had dug this grave himself. But instead, I said, he made his choices. Now he has to live with them. Still, when I hung up, guilt gnawed at me. I wasn't heartless. He was still my father, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, who once bandaged my knees when I fell. But those memories were weighed down by years of rejection, and the balance had tipped too far. The next day, Daniel showed up again. He didn't barge in this time, he knocked, almost timid. We need to talk, he said. His face was pale, his usual confidence stripped away. Inside, he dropped into a chair and rubbed his temples. I saw the numbers. What are you planning? I crossed my arms. Why? Scared it'll ruin your perfect little legacy? He looked up sharply. This isn't about me. It's about all of us. If this comes out, it doesn't just destroy Dad, it drags the family name through the mud. Everything he built, gone. I leaned closer, my voice quiet but firm. Everything I built was already invisible. Do you think I care about the name he used to humiliate me? For once, Daniel didn't have a comeback. He just sat there, silent, the weight of the truth pressing on him as much as it did on me. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. Just, be careful. You don't know what you're playing with. But he was wrong. For the first time in my life, I did know. And I wasn't playing anymore. The line between revenge and revelation was razor thin, and I had already crossed it. The following week was a blur of tension. I tried focusing on work, but every time I picked up a pencil, my mind returned to the folder on my table. It was as though the documents were alive, whispering to me, do it. Show them. End the lie. One evening, my mother called again, her voice shaky. He collapsed today, she said. Just for a moment. The doctor says it's stress. He won't talk to anyone, not even me. He just keeps staring at that letter. For a flicker of a second, guilt struck me. My chest tightened at the thought of him pale and weak in the study. But then I remembered the banquet, the laughter, the decades of being dismissed. His collapse wasn't because of me, it was because of the walls he built on lies. Later that night, I drove past their house. The curtains were closed, but I could see a faint glow from his study. I parked across the street and sat in silence, watching. A part of me wanted to march up the steps and tell him I knew everything. Another part wanted to leave the folder on the porch, ring the bell, and walk away forever. But I didn't move. Not yet. The next day, I met with Daniel again, this time at a cafe near his office. He looked haggard, his shirt wrinkled, his tie loose. He leaned in close, speaking in a harsh whisper. You don't get it. If this goes public, it's not just Dad who pays. The company could press charges. They could strip his pension. Mom could lose the house. I sipped my coffee, steadying myself. So I'm supposed to keep quiet? Pretend nothing happened, like always? His eyes narrowed. Yes. Because this isn't about you anymore. It's bigger than you. The word stung, but instead of shrinking, I straightened. Funny. That's what he's told me my whole life, that I don't matter. Well, Daniel, I'm done being small. I won't carry his sins in silence. For a moment, I thought Daniel might explode, but instead, he just looked away, his jaw tight. He had no defense, no clever words this time. When I left the cafe, my heart was pounding. I realized there was no turning back now. The more they begged me to stay silent, the more certain I became, the truth needed to come out. I didn't know exactly how I would do it, but I knew this: his legacy was built on lies, and lies don't stay buried forever. And soon, neither would I. 2 nights later, I received an unexpected call from one of my father's former coworkers. His voice was hesitant, almost apologetic. "I probably shouldn't be saying this," he began, "but I always wondered how your dad managed to keep certain projects afloat. There were gaps. Missing funds, unexplained delays. Now, after hearing whispers about what happened at the banquet, I'm starting to think you know more than the rest of us." I froze, the phone pressed tightly to my ear. So the cracks were already showing. People had noticed, even if they never dared to say it aloud. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He sighed. "Because truth has a way of surfacing, whether we want it to or not. And when it does, someone always gets dragged under." After we hung up, I sat in silence, my pulse racing. The secret I carried wasn't just dangerous to my father, it was volatile enough to explode through every corner of his carefully curated world. That weekend, my mother invited me over for dinner. I almost refused, but something in her voice, tired, fragile, made me agree. When I arrived, the house was quiet. Too quiet. My father sat at the table, thinner than I remembered, his hands clasped tightly as if holding himself together. He didn't meet my eyes. Instead, he muttered, "If you love this family, you'll keep your mouth shut." I stared at him, searching for even a flicker of remorse, of recognition for all the years I gave. There was none. Only fear. Only desperation to protect himself. That was the moment I knew. I couldn't protect him anymore. Later that night, I spread the documents across my own kitchen table again. The evidence. The lies. The truth. My chest ached, but my resolve hardened. I whispered to myself, "It ends with me." And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the storm I was about to unleash. The night I chose to act was the night of the neighborhood's autumn gathering, a tradition my parents had never missed. Everyone would be there: coworkers, old friends, extended family. The same people who had laughed at me at the banquet would be gathered again, glasses in hand, toasting my father's remarkable career. I didn't plan a dramatic speech or public outburst. That wasn't my way. Quiet revenge demands patience, precision. I printed copies of the documents, just enough to speak for themselves, and slipped them into discreet envelopes. Each one bore no name, no explanation. Only truth. As I walked into the community hall that evening, I could feel the weight of eyes on me. Some people whispered, remembering the scene I'd caused at the retirement party. My father stood near the front, smiling too widely, his skin pale beneath the bright lights. His laugh sounded forced, brittle. I didn't approach him. Instead, I moved quietly through the room, placing the envelopes where they would inevitably be found, on the buffet table, under coats in the cloakroom, slipped between the pages of the program booklets. The evidence would circulate on its own, like wildfire fanned by curiosity. And it did. It started with a murmur near the back, a confused voice asking, "Have you seen this?" Then another, sharper, "Is this real?" Papers began passing from hand to hand. Eyes widened. Conversations halted. The cheerful background music seemed almost mocking as silence spread across the hall. Finally, all eyes turned to my father. I watched from the edge of the room as his smile faltered. Someone shoved the papers into his hand, and I saw the color drain from his face. His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked around desperately, for an excuse, for support, for a shield. But none came. Daniel stepped forward, his face ashen, but instead of defending our father, he whispered something I couldn't hear. Then he walked away, leaving the old man standing alone. My mother's hand shook as she covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. And me? I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The truth was louder than anything I could have shouted. The room began to buzz again, this time with sharper voices. Words like fraud, theft, betrayal floated through the air. My father, the man who had once declared I never had what it takes, stood exposed, stripped of the honor he valued more than his own daughter. For a fleeting moment, he looked at me across the room. His eyes were wide, pleading. But I held his gaze, steady and unflinching. This was the point of no return. The empire of pride he had built for decades crumbled in a single evening, not with shouting, not with fists, but with silence and paper. And as he sank into a chair, his head in his hands, I felt no triumph. Only a hollow ache that whispered, justice always carries a cost. But the cost wasn't mine this time. It was his. The days after the gathering were eerily quiet. No phone calls from my brothers, no messages from family friends, no attempts at damage control. The silence spoke louder than any words, everyone knew, and no one was rushing to shield my father anymore. The company released a formal statement 3 days later. Irregularities in financial records was how they phrased it, though everyone understood what it meant. His pension was frozen pending investigation. The man once celebrated as a model employee was now whispered about as a cautionary tale. I didn't go to my parents' house. I couldn't. But one evening, my mother appeared at my door. She looked smaller somehow, weighed down by shame she hadn't earned. I poured her tea, and for a long time, she sat in silence, staring at the steam. Finally, she whispered, "You've destroyed him." The words stung, but I didn't flinch. "No, Mom. He destroyed himself. I just stopped cleaning up the mess." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. Deep down, she knew it was true. For decades, I had been the invisible support beam holding up a house of lies. Now that I'd stepped aside, the house had crumbled. After she left, I sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the trees. For the first time in years, I felt light, not triumphant, not vengeful, just free. In the following weeks, I returned to my studio, poured myself into work, and reconnected with friends I had neglected while carrying my family's burdens. For once, my life was my own. As for my father, I heard he rarely left his study anymore. The man who once commanded rooms now avoided even his neighbors. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, what I felt was something quieter, deeper, release. One evening, months later, I drove past their house. The lights were on, but the windows seemed dim, the walls heavier somehow. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. My revenge wasn't about gloating or watching him fall apart. It was about finally being seen, even if only by myself. I remembered the banquet, the laughter, his cruel words, "My daughter never had what it takes." And I smiled to myself, whispering into the night, "I always did." The revenge was never loud. It didn't need to be. It was quiet, steady, inevitable, like truth itself. And with that truth finally out in the open, I walked forward into a life that, at last, belonged to me.